Waco Plan Commission on April 27, 2021 to order. The time is 7:21 p.m. On March 16, 2020, the governor suspended various provisions of the Open Meetings Act pursuant to a state of disaster authority. The change was effective March 16, 2020 until further notice or until the state disaster declaration expires. In accordance with social distancing guidelines and while providing as much transparency as possible, the Waco Plan Commission meeting will be closed to the public attending in person. This meeting is being broadcast live at www.wccc.tv. The audio is being recorded and the recording will be made available to the public. According to the Attorney General, governmental bodies must offer members of the public alternative methods of communication with their public officials. In an effort to allow for as much public input as possible, those who wish to speak by phone or public hearings were required to register with planning staff by 12 p.m. on April 27, 2021. The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes of our March 23rd, 2021 work session and business meeting. Are there any changes or additions? Seeing none, they stand approved as written. We'll now move on to our public hearing agenda items. Mr. Peter, would you present the subdivisions we have?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we do have 5 subdivision plats. This is a public hearing to consider them. The first one is final plat and construction plans of the Springs Addition, Phase 1. Final plat and construction plan of the Deer Valley Estates Addition. Final plat and construction plan of the Hunters Creek Addition. Final plat and construction plan of the Landers Gardens Addition Phase 2, and final plat and construction plans of the Landers Gardens Addition Phase 3. Staff has reviewed these plats and recommends approval with conditions of all 5 of these plats. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
We'll now open the public hearing on this item. We have, I believe, Mr. Bell registered to speak.
Yes, we have Jacob Bell registered to speak on item 2 and 3. And we'll let him into the room. Jacob Bell. Yeah. Jacob, you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you're ready to go.
Thank you. This is Jacob Bell with Walker Partners. Address is 823 Washington Avenue, Waco, Texas. I am here to speak in favor of Deer Valley Estates and Hunters Creek Addition. Nothing much to say other than be happy to answer any questions that you have or any other public commenters. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Bell? All right. Thank you for coming on tonight. I believe we have a Mr. Landreth for items 4 and 5.
There we go. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Yep, just Nate Landreth here in favor of plat phase 2 and 3. If you've got any questions, here to answer.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. Landreth? All right. Thank you for joining us. We will talk to you in a little bit on your other items. Do we have any questions for city staff on these final plats and construction plans?
The question is that we're able to make a motion on all 5 together? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the recommendation is approval with conditions. Yeah.
Yes. And I would mention, and I said this at the work session, but we went through it real quick, that several of these are real close to meeting all the conditions. So we anticipate that they'll be submitting responses pretty quick. So there might be the need for a special call meeting within that 15-day window to keep them on the schedule for the May 18th City Council meeting.
Great. Is there any additional discussion? We'll close the public hearing. Do we have a motion on these items?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion on the recommendation of, based upon staff's finding, that we make a recommendation of approval with conditions.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Ramos, second by Ms. Jefferson. Do we have any further discussion? If you'd like to vote in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. If you would like to vote in opposition to the motion, please raise your hand. All right. Motion passes.
Hey, Ross.
Yeah.
Real quick, I just noticed something funny. It seems like I have Jeremy's name tagged on mine
Oh, you're right.
thing, and I can't seem to change it. I was wondering if it could be changed by an admin view on the city staff side, if possible. Or let the record show that there are two Jeremy Vickers.
I think we're gonna get it changed here. Let's see.
There can never be two Jeremy Vickers, Benji. But thank you for the request, my friend.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, now that we've sorted out who is who, we will move on to our zoning applications. Ms. Wharton, will you be taking up Z-21-19?
Actually, Mr. Peters will be taking those on.
Yeah, so this is a public hearing to consider a request from Andres David Lopez Carbajal and Zeferino Lopez Carbajal for a property located at 1203 and 1205 Leach Street for a special permit for a reception facility in 03 zoning. We mailed out 41 notices and had one returned in opposition. Planning Services recommends approval of special permit subject to the special provisions and conditions and based on the following findings, that the proposed use is consistent with the comprehensive plan, that the proposed use is compatible with the appropriate and orderly development of the area which is located, that the proposed use would not be more objectionable to neighboring properties because of traffic congestion, noise, fumes, vibrations, or any other characteristics than any use permitted in the zoning district without the grant of the special exception, and that available community facilities and services, including the road system providing access to the proposed use, are adequate for the proposed use.
Thank you. We will now open our public hearing. We have no registered speakers. Are there any questions for city staff on this item? Hearing none, we will, Mr. Ramos, do you have something?
Yeah, I think you said it was mentioned in the work session that there was some permit or some building code things that need to be addressed.
Yes, sir. There's a condition on the special provision conditions that dealing with building codes. And so there is a condition in there that the building must be brought up to the 2018 International Building Code before occupancy.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Is there any additional discussion? All right. We'll close the public hearing. We have a recommendation of approval from city staff. Do we have any motions on this issue?
I move to approve with conditions.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Browse, second by Mr. Vickers. Is there any further discussion? If you'd like to vote in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. If you would like to vote in opposition, please raise your hand. I believe that passes unanimously. Mr. Peters, in the case of Z-21-30, what is the recommendation of city staff?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, I actually went out of order. So we did 30 first, and I need to go back to 29.
Okay. I thought, I got a little mixed up on that as we were talking about code issues. Okay.
So we're going to do 29 now. I apologize for that. So this is a public hearing on our crest from Rotunda Rose Carmel on behalf of Body Investments LLC at that property located at 1014 North Valley Mills Drive, Suite B, for a special permit to extend the hours of operation and allow retail sales between the hours of 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. in a 03 district. We mailed out 30 notices on this one and had 3 returned, 1 with no comment and 2 opposed. Planning Services recommends approval of the special permit subject to the special provisions and conditions and based on the following findings. That the proposed use is consistent with the comprehensive plan, that the proposed use is compatible with appropriate and orderly development of the area in which is located, that the proposed use will not be more objectionable to neighboring properties because of traffic congestion, noise, fumes, vibrations, or any other characteristics that any use permitted in the zoning district without the grant of this special exception, and that available community facilities and services, including the road system, providing access to the proposed use are adequate for the proposed use.
Okay, thank you. We'll now open the public hearing. We do not have any registered speakers on this item. Do we have any additional discussion or questions for staff?
Yeah, I had one more on that right there. What other businesses are up against residential other than down the road restaurants and is there any other properties that are up against residential like this one is?
So on, in this shopping center, there's houses up against it. On the road behind it on Emerson, you have the parking lot for the barbecue place that backs up to it, at Dan's Barbecue. And then, up and down Valley Mills, you do have some commercial that backs up to it, backs up to residential, but it's not right next to it. Everything else looks like it backs up to residential neighborhoods.
Okay.
Any additional discussion or questions? We'll close the public hearing. We have a recommendation of approval. Do we have any motions on this item?
Based upon findings of staff, I recommend we approve this item.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Browse, second by Ms. Jefferson. Is there any discussion on this motion? If you would like to vote in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. If you would like to vote in opposition to this motion, please raise your hand. All right, we have 9 votes in favor, 1 vote in opposition. Mr. Peters, just to clarify, we've already covered Z-21-30. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
That was the first one. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, we'll move on to item number 8, case Z-21-27. What's the recommendation of city staff?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. This is a public hearing to consider a request from Carlos Diaz on behalf of Kaja Corporation at 2412 Maple Avenue in 1839 North 25th Street for land use designation change from medium density residential office flex to mixed use flex and the rezone from O3 to C2. We mailed out 24 on this one and had 0 return. Planning Services recommends this approval of the land use designation change based on the following finding. The proposed land use could be considered incompatible with the existing low density residential land use adjacent to the subject property. And staff does recommend its approval of the zone change as well, based on the following findings: that the proposed zoning is not keeping with the land use component of the comprehensive plan, and the existing O3 zoning is more compatible with the adjacent residential uses than the proposed C2 zoning.
Thank you. We will now open our public hearing on this item. Is there any additional questions for staff or discussion? Okay. Hearing none, we will close the public hearing. We do have a recommendation of disapproval by city staff. Do we have any motions on this item?
Based on findings and conditions of staff, I recommend disapproval of the requested zone change.
Second.
We have a motion to disapprove the application by Ms. Wade, a second by Mr. Ramos. Is there any additional discussion? If you would like to vote in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. If you would like to vote in opposition to this motion, please raise your hand. All right, we have a vote of 8 in favor and 2 in opposition. Moving on to case Z-21-31. Mr. Peters, what's the recommendation of city staff?
Yes, sir. This is a public hearing to consider a request from Sheila Brown in the city of Waco on properties located at 421, 425, 427, 429, 507, 511, 513, 515, 517, 715, 719, 721, 723, and 725 Clifton Street, and 1306 Grant Street, 406 and 410 Phillip Street, and 510 Phillip Street off, which is what is in the McLennan County Appraisal District address, to rezone from C3 and R2 to O3. We mailed out 154 notices on this one and had one returned with no comments. Planning Services recommends approval. We also did receive a response from the Northeast Riverside Neighborhood Association in favor of this request. Planning Services recommends approval of the request to change the zoning from R2 and C3 to O3 based on the following findings. 1, the proposed zoning is keeping with the land use component of the comprehensive plan. 2, the public infrastructure is adequate to provide for uses allowed in O3 zoning. 3, the property meets all the area and width requirements for O3 zoning district. 4, the proposed O3 zoning is compatible with surrounding area. And 5, the O3 zoning brings existing residential uses into conformance with the zoning ordinance.
All righty, thank you. We'll now open our public hearing on this item. We have no public speaker, no registered speakers on this item. Is there any questions or discussion? All right. Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing. We have a recommendation of approval from city staff. Do we have any motions on this case?
I move to approve the recommendations of the staff.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Vickers, second by Mr. Browse. Is there any additional discussion? If you would like to vote in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. All right. Vote is unanimous in favor. We'll move ourselves on to case Z-21-32. Mr. Peters, what's the recommendation of staff?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. This is a public hearing on a request from Cornerstone Group on behalf of Chapel Land Holdings LLC for approval of final PUD plan phases 2 and 3 for a plan unit development currently on the property located behind and east of 9821 Chapel Road, described as follows. Phase 2 is being 7.969 acres of land in the James M. Conrad Survey, abstract number 224, McLennan County, Texas. Being out of that call, 28-616 acres of land described in a deed to Chapel Land Holdings LLC, recorded under McLennan County Clerk's file number 2019-030914 of the official public records of McLennan County, Texas. And phase 3 being 8.221 acres of land out of the James M. Conrad Survey, abstract number 224 in McLennan County, Texas. Being out of that call, 28.616 acres of land described in a deed to Chapel Land Holdings LLC, recorded under McLennan County Clerk's file number 2019-030914 of the official public records of McLennan County, Texas. We did mail out 119 notices on this one, had 5 returned, one in favor, one that was interested in it, and then 3 with some concerns. Planning Services recommends approval of the final PUD based on the following findings and conditions. The findings that the final PUD plan is consistent with the approved concept PUD plan, conditions of the approved concept PUD plan, and the requirements of the PUD ordinance. 2, that circulation plan, public facilities and service plan, preliminary architectural plan, and site development and landscaping plans, including the final PUD, are adequate. We do have 2 conditions. At time of development, full building plans must be submitted meeting all City of Waco development requirements, including but not limited to the following: applicable building codes, site grading and drainage, parking, signage, vehicle, pedestrian access and circulation, landscaping, refuse location and access, and fire protection location access. Building permits will not be issued until full compliance with all development standards of the City of Waco and the approved PUD plans. And 2, the property must be platted meeting all the requirements of the PUD and subdivision ordinance before issuance of building permits.
All right, thank you. We will now open the public hearing. We have 1 public speaker scheduled.
Good evening, y'all. Nate Landreth here, developer. It's been a several year process getting this thing going, and phase 1 is wrapping up now. And this is just phase 2 and 3. Overall, the density is coming down like we kind of anticipated, and this is going to be all single family. Originally, the approved preliminary had some space for townhomes and a little bit more density in some of this area, but I'm personally super excited about phase 2 and 3 with over 4.5 acres of common space and some exciting, not concrete plans of what to do in those common areas, but a lot of options that we're kind of trying to figure out which way to go on. So I'm really excited and getting a lot of interest from the public, and here to answer any questions y'all got.
All right. Thanks, sir. Do we have any questions on PUD for Mr. Landreth?
I was going to ask Mr. Landreth, on that development on the very back side, so kind of the triangle shaped portion, are those single family?
On the kind of the west side towards Fossil Ridge?
Yes.
Those in the excuse me, in the approved preliminary were outlined to be either single family or townhome style, like 3 or 4 units together. But honestly, it's looking more and more like it would be single family all throughout. But that we haven't gotten that far. We're just kind of seeing how there's a lot of interest in the small garden homes. A lot of elderly have reached out to me just in the last 2 weeks since we really started advertising phase 1. And so I think that trend will continue.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions for the applicant? All right, Mr. Landreth, thanks for joining us again. And
Sure.
Yep, have a great evening. Okay, do we have, is there any further discussion on this PUD or questions for staff? All right, hearing none, we will close the public hearing. We have a recommendation for approval. Do we have any motions on this item?
Yeah, motion that we recommend approval on this item.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Ramos, second by Mr. Vickers. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, if you'd like to vote in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. All right, passes unanimously. Thank you. Alrighty, so moving along, we will be taking up case Z-21-33. And Mr. Peters, what's the recommendation of city staff?
Yes, sir. This is a public hearing on a request from Mary Wise and John Calloway on behalf of Mission Waco Mission World Incorporated at the property located at 2322 and 2324 Gorman Avenue to rezone from R3E to O3. We mailed out 31 notices on this one and had 0 return. Planning Services recommends approval of the zone change request based on the following findings. 1, the proposed zoning is keeping with the land use component of the comprehensive plan. 2, the public infrastructure is adequate to provide for uses allowed in O3 zoning. 3, the property meets all the area and width requirements for O3 zoning. And 4, the proposed O3 zoning is compatible with the surrounding area.
Righty, thank you. We will now open our public hearing. We have 3 registered speakers scheduled on this item tonight.
Sorry, wrong one. Just a moment. Hi, Mr. Calloway, can you hear us?
Yes, this is John Calloway. I'm Executive Director. Obviously, I'm in favor of this rezone. Certainly here with 2 of my staff to answer any questions you may have.
All righty, thank you, Mr. Calloway. Do any members of the commission have any questions for Mr. Calloway?
Yeah, I do actually. Hi there, Mr. Calloway. My name is Ray Jefferson. I was just wondering, what would the intended use of this space be going forward?
It'll be a capacity of 12 recovery house residential 90-day program. Permanently, free for McLennan County residents and fees for those outside of McLennan County. Good question.
Great. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions for Mr. Calloway?
I guess mine would be for city staff with Mr. Calloway. Is there additional permit for recovery house, or does that just fall under this actual permit request?
So yeah, that's a good question. So and just a reminder for the Plan Commission, when we look at zoning change, we have to consider all the uses. But what he's talking about would require an additional special permit that would have to come through this board for approval for the recovery house if the O3 zoning is approved.
Okay.
Anything else for staff or Mr. Calloway? All right. Mr. Calloway, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, guys and gals.
Righty. Ms. Wise, are you able to hear us?
Yes, I am. I'm Kathy Wise. My first name's Mary, so that's why they listed me as Mary there. And I'm on Mission Waco staff and was one of the people that put together the application. And yes, I'm in favor of it and just available for any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Wise? All right. Well, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you later, I suppose. We'll continue on.
Fine.
All right, and I think we have a Mr. Hartsfield as well.
I actually don't see him on here. I'm not sure if he, Mr. Hartsfield, if you're calling on a phone, if you could possibly try to raise your hand. Oh. Hi, Ms. Wise.
Yeah, Mr. Hartsfield is the director of the program. And so I don't know if we did have some of that difficulty earlier getting in, and I don't know if he got the new email with the new link or not, but he was just going to be available to take questions.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. All right, well, we will move on from there. Do we have any further discussion on the item or for staff? Okay, we will close the public hearing. We have a recommendation of approval from city staff. Do we have any motions on this item?
I'll motion that we accept city staff recommendation for approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Cole, second by Mr. Ramos. Any additional discussion? All right, if you would like to vote in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. All right, motion passes unanimously. Mr. Peters, in the case of Z-2134, what is the recommendation of city staff?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. This is a public hearing to consider a request from James McCoy at property located at 1101 and 1103 Vine Street for a land use designation change from urban residential medium density from urban residential to medium density residential office flex and to rezone from R2 to O3. We mailed out 38 on this one and had one return in opposition. Planning Services recommends disapproval land use designation change from urban residential to medium density residential office flex based on the following findings. One, the proposed land use could be considered incompatible with the existing low density residential land use adjacent to the subject property. Planning Services also recommends disapproval of zone change based on the following findings. One, the proposed zoning is not keeping with the land use component of the comprehensive plan. Two, the existing R2 zoning is more compatible with the adjacent residential uses than the proposed O3. And three, that there is an adequate supply of underutilized and vacant land currently zoned for office and commercial uses located along Waco Drive to support the appropriate growth and development of the surrounding area.
All right, thank you. We will now open our public hearing. I believe we have the applicant registered to speak on this item.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Mr. McCoy, thank you for joining us. If you could just state your name, address, and any comments you have for the commission.
James McCoy, 1209 Westwood Street, Waco, Texas. Thank you for allowing me to come on. I was really wanting to zone the property to C3. There seems to have been a miscommunication between Mark Boyd and I on the request. But I had an opportunity to buy the property a while back. I've got two daughters, both are entrepreneurs. They have nowhere to operate their businesses from. I have another goddaughter who also has an operation. And I wanted to build a metal building with 4 units that are separate from each other. They have their own air conditioning, their own everything. And my daughter would occupy 2. I personally have a business myself. I'm operating out of my own home and have been for a while. But I just retired from 26 years to housing authority. And rather than take my retirement money and buy a brand new car, I decided to invest in their businesses and their future by giving them a permanent place to operate from. It's not going to be selling any products. My daughter has a gourmet pickle business. The other makes T-shirts. And my goddaughter has a paint talk. She's an artist, local artist. She has nowhere to be. She was in a building that leaked and the plumbing was bad. And I decided that my legacy here, hopefully, I grew up in East Waco and all the negative connotations about East Waco, I decided to try to leave something that would be a light and a legacy in that community where we'd have people actually producing a product in that community. So we're right down the street from J. Hines, where I attended school. Rappaport, right behind Jill Wiley. And this would be, in my opinion, an enhancement to the community There are 3 units, 1108 Vine is a C3. I think it's 1225 East Waco Drive is a C3. And 1101 East Waco Drive is a C3. I'm 55 feet away from one unit, about 80 feet away from the other unit, and I'm about half a block down from the 1108 on the same street, same block. And that's really what I want to do. I want to have a nice new constructed building so they'll have a place to operate from.
All righty. Well, thank you for that, Mr. McCoy. First off, congratulations on your retirement. And
Thank you.
do we have any questions specifically for Mr. McCoy from the commissioners?
Well, I have a question about the effect of our documents reflecting him seeking one sort of permit and him orally stating that he's seeking another. What do we do with that?
So we're only posted for 03, so the Plan Commission can't take any action on any other request than what's posted on the agenda.
Okay. Then 03, I don't really know the difference between the code identification numbers. So what is the difference between a C3 and a 03?
So the C3 is a general commercial zoning district that allows basically all your retail uses, restaurants, convenience stores, car lots, all your commercial uses that you see on Waco Drive and Valley Mills Drive and Franklin, where 03 is more of a mixed use district that's designed to be more compatible with residential areas. So it does allow some retail uses, some less intense retail uses, some office uses, and then some residential uses, single family and duplex. There are some, for retail uses, there are some limitations on hours of operation from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Okay, then what I'm requesting is 03, I guess, then, because it's going to more or less as I described to you earlier.
Yeah, what you described would fit into the 03 zoning district.
Okay.
Excellent. So right now we are taking up the 03 zoning request. Do commissioners have any other questions for Mr. McCoy? All righty. Mr. McCoy, thank you for joining us. All right. Do we have any additional discussion by commissioners or questions for city staff?
Ross, we did have one last minute registered speaker. It's Judge James Lee, so I'm going to go ahead and allow him to speak.
Okay, great.
He was not on your list originally.
No problem.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for allowing me to register late. I apologize on that, but I am here to speak in favor of this request. However, it disturbs me that he didn't actually get a good clarification as to exactly what he wanted. So with that being stated openly, I'm hoping that the Plan Commission takes that into consideration and could possibly table this if it's a no vote. And that's something that I know you can't, speak in advance in regards to how you're going to vote on that. But I would hope that, someone would take that into consideration so that he knows exactly what he's actually preparing for. But I am for it. I think that as an African-American elected official, I encourage African-Americans to invest in our community. And I think that his vision and his goal would benefit our community. If his request could possibly fit into the C3 zoning change, I think that is a great possibility for him. And that's something that city staff and Mr. McCoy could speak about afterwards if this motion is tabled. So with that being said, I'm encouraged with what Mr. McCoy is doing. We did meet, far as the Carver Neighborhood Association is who I'm representing today. We met prior to this meeting, and no one was opposed to this. And as Justice of the Peace, again, I am encouraged to see African Americans invest in our community. Not that I'm not encouraged with others, but I do want to see homegrown individuals just like Mr. McCoy come back to our community. They can, take some of the bad images out of East Waco and make things so much more beautiful for the future. So again, I am for it. Members of the Carver Neighborhood Association have spoken and they are for it. And I do hope that you all consider everything that has transpired within the last 15 minutes before you make a decision. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Judge Lee. With regard to that concern, if we move forward on this motion, regardless of which way the vote goes, that does not preclude Mr. McCoy from returning at the next meeting with an application for a C3 zoning change. Is that correct? Or does this limit his future options?
A change to C3 could come back with that request. My understanding is when planning staff talked to Mr. McCoy about the zoning request, he originally was asking for C3, and staff advised him that O3 is more of a compatible use with the residential area and would have the higher likelihood of being approved than a C3 district, and it fit his use, his intended use, and that's why the O3 was decided to move forward instead of the C3, because C3 being a heavier commercial use and introducing that into the neighborhood. So that was the reason why the O3 was decided instead of the C3. But to answer your question, if the O3 was turned down, recommended for denial by Plan Commission, turned down by council, he could request C3, but again, in my opinion, the likelihood of a C3 zoning getting approved when an O3 zoning doesn't get approved are pretty limited because of the heavier uses that are allowed in C3 zoning.
And similarly, if we approve the O3 and further clarification occurred, he could come back and request C3.
That's correct. Yes. And I would mention we do have some alternate findings for approval if that's something the Plan Commission will want to do, and we can read those into record. And then one other thing I didn't mention on our comment card information, we did get a call from the president of the Northeast Riverside Neighborhood Association, which this is located in favor of this change.
Could you read could we hear the alternative recommendations?
Yes, sir. Just a second. So the alternate recommendation would be for approval for the land use designation change based on the following findings. One, the public infrastructure is adequate to provide for zoning districts allowed in the proposed medium density residential office flex land use designation. And two, the property is located near a major street, Waco Drive. And then on the zoning change, it would, for approval, would be the proposed zoning is keeping with the land use component of the comprehensive plan as revised. The public infrastructure is adequate to provide for uses allowed in O3 zoning. And then once platted, the property meets all the width area width requirements for the O3 zoning district.
Thank you. For the alternative findings, is there any further discussion amongst commissioners?
So does he require, he said he wanted to construct a metal building. So does he require a building permit, a separate process to get a building permit to construct that?
Correct. So if the zoning was approved, then he could go through the development process for a building permit and, submit their building plans and get those reviewed and approved. That would be a staff approval process. It wouldn't have to come back through a public hearing process.
But based on what's known, you anticipate that there's no impediment. If O3 is approved, that's not incompatible with receiving the building permit.
For the use he mentioned would be allowed use in O3. There are not any specific design requirements in that area that would prohibit metal buildings. It would just need to meet all the building code requirements for construction of a metal building.
Okay. Any further discussion amongst commissioners or for staff? All right. Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing. We do have an initial recommendation of disapproval from city staff, but have also been offered alternate findings for approval of the zoning and land use changes. Do we have a motion on this item?
Yes, I'd like to motion based upon the alternate findings that we do recommend approval for change to O3 zoning.
Second. Yeah.
We have a motion for approval of the request by Mr. Ramos and a second by Mr. Smith, Mr. Vickers simultaneously. Is there any further discussion on this item? Hearing none, if you would like to vote in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. If you'd like to vote in opposition to this motion, please raise your hand. I believe motion passes. I couldn't quite tell. Ms. Kazanis, was that a vote in favor or?
Sorry, that was a no vote because I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
No problem. No problem. So voted 9-1. Motion passes. Alrighty, we'll move on to item number 13. In the case of Z-21-35, Mr. Peters, what is your recommendation, or what is staff's recommendation?
Yes, sir. This is a public hearing on request from Mark Faulkner on behalf of China Spring ISD for property located at 6301 Sylvia Avenue to rezone from R1B and M2 to O3 zoning. We mailed out 16 notices on this one and had 0 return. Planning Services recommends approval of the zone change request based on the following findings. 1, the proposed zoning is keeping with the land use component of the comprehensive plan. 2, the public infrastructure is adequate to provide for uses allowed in O3 zoning. 3, the property meets all the area and width requirements for O3 zoning. And 4, the proposed O3 zoning is compatible with the surrounding area.
All right, thank you. Now open our public hearing. We have no registered speakers on this item. Is there any discussion amongst commissioners? All right, hearing none. Staff, do we have anything on this issue?
Ross, you cut out there.
I'm sorry, can y'all see me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I got an unstable internet. Do we have a recommendation of approval? Do we have any motions on Z-21-35?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, based upon staff finding, I'd like to motion that we recommend approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Ramos and a second by Mr. Vickers. Is there any additional discussion? All right, if you'd like to vote in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. All right, motion passes unanimously. Alrighty, in the case of ABD 21-4, Mr. Peters, what is staff's recommendation?
Yes, sir. This is a request from Waco Industrial, a public hearing on request from Waco Industrial Foundation for the abandonment of right-of-way at the end of Wycon Drive near Texas Central Parkway, described as a 1.557 acre right-of-way situated in the PM Maxwell Survey abstract number 576, McLennan County, Texas, and being all of that called 70-foot wide, 1.56 acre right-of-way. Dedication as shown on final plat of Texas Central South Edition, Lot 3, Block 3, as recorded in McLennan County Clerk's file number 2001-039158 of the official public records in McLennan County, Texas. We did mail out 8 notices on this and had 0 return. Planning Services recommends approval of the abandonment request based on the following findings and conditions. 1, that public use of the right-of-way is not required for proper flow or traffic for proper flow of traffic or for emergency vehicle access to the area. And 2, utility access for surrounding properties is not adversely impacted by the abandonment of the right-of-way. We do have 2 conditions: that all existing water and wastewater easements be retained by the City of Waco. Utilities must be relocated at the developer's expense for the area of the abandoned right-of-way, and that the new cul-de-sac must be built and right-of-way dedicated at the end of the reconfigured Wycon Road as part of the platting process for the development.
All right, thank you. I'll now open the hearing on this item. Are there any questions for staff on the abandonment? Okay, hearing none, we will close the public hearing. We have a recommendation of approval from staff. Do we have any motions on this item?
Based on the recommendation of staff, I move that we approve the request for abandonment.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Wade, second by Mr. Browse. Any additional discussion? All right. If you'd like to vote in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. Oh, sorry, one moment. Mr. Ramos, did you have a statement? Okay, vote in favor. Excellent. Okay, if you'd like to vote in favor, please raise your hand. Make sure I get the counts right. All right, motion passes unanimously. Mr. Peters, in the case of ABD-21-5, what's staff's recommendation?
Yes, sir. This is a public hearing request from Vernon Davis on behalf of East Riverside Holdings LLC for the abandonment of a 20-foot alley located between Bridge Street and Taylor Avenue, described as being all of that tract of land in McLennan County, Texas, being all of the 20-foot wide alley in Block 23 of the H&TC Railroad addition to the City of Waco, recorded in volume 186, page 396 of the deed records in McLennan County, Texas. We mailed out 16 notices on this one and had 0 return. We did get a response from the neighborhood association in favor of this request. Planning Services recommends approval of the abandonment based on the following findings and conditions. 1, that public use of the right-of-way is not required for proper flow or traffic or for emergency vehicle access to the area, and utility access for surrounding property is not adversely impacted by the abandonment of the right-of-way. And we do have 2 conditions. 1, that an existing wastewater easement must be retained by the City of Waco for the area of the abandoned alley, and that the applicant must provide an exhibit field notes for each portion of the abandoned alley needed for associated quitclaim deeds.
Excellent. We'll now open our public hearing on this item. We have 1 public speaker registered. And Mr. Davis, welcome.
Mr. Davis, can you hear us?
If you can hear us, Mr. Davis, you're actually on mute right now.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Mr. Davis, yeah, welcome to the meeting. If you could just state your name and address your comments to the commission.
I'm Vernon Davis. I live at 323 North 7th, Waco. I'm just here to speak on behalf of the request in favor and avail myself should there be any questions.
Thank you, sir. Do you have any questions for our applicant? All right. Mr. Davis, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions for city staff before we close the public hearing? Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing. We have a recommendation of approval from staff. Do we have any motions on this item?
Yeah, based on staff finding, I motion that we recommend approval.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Ramos, second by Ms. Wade. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, if you would like to vote in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously. We'll move on to our final agenda item. Mr. Peters, what is the proposed ordinance change before us tonight?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is a public hearing to consider an ordinance amending various sections of Chapter 28 zoning of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Waco, Texas, to remove short-term rental type 2 and short-term rental type 3 from the special use sections of the zoning districts, repealing all ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing a severability clause, providing for inclusion in the code, providing for penalties, and finding determine that the meeting at which this ordinance is passed is open to the public as required by law. Staff does recommend approval of this ordinance change. We do want to be able to have some time to evaluate impact of short-term rental, especially in some of our single-family neighborhoods on housing affordability and availability. And we feel like having special permit applications coming in during that time would be difficult to provide that time to have a good dialogue and time to appropriately evaluate that. So that's why this request is being brought forward to you.
All right, thank you. We'll now open the public hearing on this item. Do we have any discussion or questions for staff before we close public hearing?
Yeah, I have a question. Mr. Peters, what are the functional justifications for this? Why is it necessary to stop allowing STR 2s and 3s during the review process versus allowing them to continue while you review? What's the reason for this model versus leaving it as is while you evaluate?
I mean, I think there's two reasons that we're looking at. The first one is if it's determined that these are having a negative impact on affordability and availability, and we're still allowing these to come forward as we're evaluating this, then you're just making the situation that much worse. And then the second item is just the ability for both the Planning Commission and Council to be able to consider this, at a period of time where we're not also considering specific cases, where you can look more at the big picture instead of having to look at these individually during that time period. So those would be the two reasons why we think this is appropriate to take a pause on this and let us evaluate it appropriately while there's not cases coming through at the same time.
Thank you.
Is there a plan of action as far as I don't know, doing a study or some sort of research? How are we going to determine whether or not these are having a detriment?
Yeah, so we're actually, there's a work session scheduled with City Council at their meeting next week to kind of go over a plan of action, to review this ordinance and get their feedback on what exactly they're wanting to see as part of a study. We have got some initial feedback from them about wanting it to be somewhat data-driven to get, the trends of what we're seeing with housing affordability and availability and see if there's data out there that we can, and see if there's any correlation with that, that increase that we've seen and you know, the short-term rentals. So that's what we'll be working on with council next week to kind of formulate what information we need to put together as part of that.
Can I ask you on the ordinance, is the language suspend, stop, no longer? What is the actual language that's being that we're using in this ordinance for this period of time that we want to evaluate and
so it just deletes them. So I mean, it's not suspending, or it's not a moratorium or anything like that. It's just deleting these from the special permit categories. So as I mentioned in work session, the SCRs that are allowed by right in zoning districts can still move forward. And you know, any special permits that have already been approved, short-term rentals that have already been approved through the special permit process can allow to continue. This would just be for you know, that would new applications couldn't be submitted for these specific zoning districts for short-term rental type 2s and 3s in special permit districts.
so we would be saying you're deleting the actual permit. And
it's a deletion, yes.
It's a deletion so that you can either discover or come up with a new permit, new ordinance for type 2, type 3.
Correct.
Is that to some degree a limitation of the capacity of the language of the ordinance to where we can't, like, can the language not adjust to like a pause, and so it's kind of like we need to remove it, and then in 3-6 months if we want to add it back in, we can?
All this would do is to remove it. There's no language in there that it comes back in 3 or 6 months. There would have to be in the future, if it's decided that, hey, we really had it right, that there's not an impact in residential areas from these short-term rentals, we would need to do another ordinance amendment, adding them back into the special use area.
So I'm not a big fan of short-term rentals, but this seems so odd to me. Is that, I mean, how many times do we have something where we've enacted a statute, we're moving ahead with it, and then, oh, we need to study the impact of this ordinance that we enacted, so we're going to just delete it in the meantime? I mean, does that just strikes me as...
Yeah, I think, you know, so we adopted this ordinance about 3 years ago, and the dynamics have changed quite a bit. And over the last several months, council has denied several of these special permit requests in residential areas and expressed the main concern is about, you know, are these causing issues with affordability and availability of residential in our community. And, you know, based on some council actions on some permits that have gone through, and just looking at the trends and housing prices and the availability of housing, we felt like this was an important step to allow us to reevaluate whether this ordinance that we adopted 3 years ago is still appropriate. We felt like the best way to do that is to remove it and give us the space to be able to do that without additional requests coming through during that time period, as I mentioned earlier.
So wouldn't it solve the same problem rather than deleting this link, basically creating rather than deleting the language to where it no longer exists as a special permit? Wouldn't it make more sense for the city to just take the position that we're going to recommend not approval of these until we finish doing our study?
I don't think the way our ordinance is right now. I mean, I don't know if that would be the appropriate way to do it. I mean,
there is a statutorily and legally, we cannot have a moratorium on certain things without going through a process, and the short-term rentals would not fit onto that process to do a statutory moratorium. Therefore, in the best interest of trying to determine the impact of short-term rentals on our housing market for our residents in certain areas in town, we need to just not accept any more applications or issue any more permits so that we can do that study. That's not something that we did 3-4 years ago when we instituted the ordinance. The housing market was different then. And so right now we're having some shortages in core areas that we need to address.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when we first adopted this ordinance, Judith's right. Affordability issue was not there. It was more, the concern was more about impact on neighborhoods and neighborhood character. And so that's what the special permit process was for. But, you know, with affordability, it's another step that we did not evaluate when we first looked at this ordinance. So to the level that the concerns are now with the change in the housing market. So that's why this is coming forward to you now.
And I have a follow-up to that. I wasn't on this board 4 years ago, so I don't know what the process was like before the special permits were enacted. What was the process for having a short-term rental before we put in the special permitting process?
So we had a general category. I can't remember what it was.
It was
temporary residential rental unit. So it was a more broader category that were allowed by special permits, similar to this. But you know, with the ordinance change, it was more of a comprehensive change that looked at specific types of STRs, and that's why we have the different categories now.
Gotcha. And so now if we delete the provisions we have now, do we revert back to there's just the one broader type of permit? I mean, my question is, what does someone do who wants to operate a short-term rental? They can't apply for a permit because there's no permit to have because we deleted the provision. So, I mean, do they just get to operate it without one? How does that work?
So, I mean, there's still, the categories will still be there. We're not amending any of the categories that used to have the short-term rental type 1, type 2, type 3. It's just where they're allowed. So there are zoning districts where a type 2 is permitted by right, and there's zoning districts where a type 3 are permitted by right. So those would continue to be able to be allowed by right. We're just talking about the ones that require special permits.
Okay. Thank you.
So what's the discretion of council to deny a permit? Because you said you can't have the moratorium, but under what circumstances could they just say, yes, we've received this, but we're not granting that request?
So council's discretion, if we were to continue to issue the special use permits, it's the same that they have right now. They would still have to have the public hearing, and they would still go through the same processes that they have right now. That's their discretion, is to take into consideration the impact it has on the neighborhood and the public hearing and whatever happens, just as your discretion when you have listened to the public hearings.
I have a quick question. I'm wanting to understand if the action we take tonight on this ordinance change, does that have to be ratified by the city council?
Yes, this is a recommendation to council, so they can go with y'all's recommendation, or you know, however they want. It's very similar to a zoning change request. It's a recommendation to the council.
But the intent and request really is truly coming from city council. Is that right?
Based on some of the input staff has received from council on previous hearings, we felt like this was the appropriate ordinance to bring.
Yeah. Mr. Peters, just one question. Looking at the ordinance, it appears, and this may be commonplace, it's going to have 2 readings in front of council. So there'll be 2 opportunities for citizens to voice support or opposition in front of council.
Correct. Yeah, the first public hearing is scheduled for May 11th, and then the second reading would be scheduled for May 18th if the council approved it on first reading on May 11th.
So even without our doing this, the council could say no to every single one, and you're going to conduct a study to figure out whether this even has the effect or is the problem in terms of affordability and availability. I mean, that's going to happen anyway.
That's correct.
Clint, just so I'm clear, again, this ordinance request is to delete type 2 and type 3, correct?
Correct. Just from the special permit categories.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just speak for me personally. I know, and this is not something that's unique across Waco, but I mean, I do think the affordability issue in our area of the town is like becoming a real issue. I mean, talking double and tripling of home prices, like within very close proximity to us. So that's not everywhere. That's not every residential neighborhood, but I mean, it's almost blisteringly fast where I am. I'll just say that. So.
Yeah, I'll say that I think it's a very important issue and one that I'm glad that the council and the city are taking seriously. I just don't know if pretending like these don't exist is a good idea.
And to be clear, it doesn't, Clint, it's, you know, they're the ones that have been granted the permit, they're not precluded from operating within these.
Correct. Yeah, if they have a approved license, they can continue to operate. This is just stopping new applications. So if somebody's operating illegally, we'll still enforce them. They just can't request a special permit if this is.
Clint, do you happen to know how many short-term rentals we have in the city currently?
Not off the top of my head, but if I remember right, it's about 300 licensed ones in the city limit.
Do we roughly know what the percentage of that is of general housing that we have in the city?
Well, I don't have that direct number. That's something we'll be looking at.
I hate to put you on the spot here too, but we're talking about just basically R1 through C1, right? Generally.
So the special the short-term rental type 2 would be the RE, R1A, R1B, and R1C, which are all single-family zoning districts. The ones y'all normally see are the R1B and then some R1A. There's not much R1C or RE zoning. And then for the STR type 3, it would be R3A, R3B, R3C, R3D, R3E, and then O2 and O3, which are multifamily zoning districts. So the ones, so the STR2s that are located in R2 districts and the office districts that are permitted by right would still be able to obtain license, and then same with the STR type 3s that are permitted by right in C2 and C3. C2 and C4, I'm sorry, C2 and C4.
There any additional questions for staff or even just discussion amongst commission? I know it's perhaps our most opinion-packed item for today. So,
but even if we do nothing, it's going to go to the council and they can delete it, which is what they want to do.
I think that's true. I mean, I think staff would speak to this. I don't think the voice of the commission is taken as nil. Regardless of whether it moves forward, I don't think there's no fruit to be had, regardless of which direction the vote goes. So. All right. Anything else? All right, so I will close the public hearing. As we know, we have a recommendation of approval from city staff. Are there any motions on whether to adopt this change in language to our short-term rental special permit language?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we move to adopt to change the ordinance pertaining to type 2 and type 3.
Second.
I got a motion by Mr. Ramos to approve and a second by Mr. Smith. Is there any additional discussion before we take our vote? All right. If you would like to vote in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. If you would like to vote in opposition to this motion, please raise your hand. All right, motion does not pass by a vote of, I believe that was 5-4. Is that correct? Or maybe 6-4.
6-4.
6-4, okay. All right, do we have any additional motions on this item?
Move to disapprove changing of the ordinance to remove type 2, type R2, R3. If I said that right.
I'll second.
We have a motion to disapprove the ordinance language change by Mr. Vickers, a second by Mr. Browse. Do we have any additional discussion? All right, if you would like to vote in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. If you would like to vote in opposition to this motion, please raise your hand. I got 4-4 on that. Does that sound correct?
Two abstentions.
2 abstentions?
Yeah, I didn't vote.
Okay, okay. Mr. Peters, what do does that include our business on the item, or?
It will just go to council with no recommendation.
Okay, okay.
I won.
All right. Well, thank you, commissioners, for joining us tonight. Thank you to our speakers for bearing with our technical difficulties, and to staff for resolving said difficulties.
Yeah, thank you for your patience. Hopefully that was a one-time issue.
Hopefully we don't even have to do it
Yes, hopefully
much longer, so we can all see each other face to face. Well, y'all have a good evening, and meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.